We have breaking news, another tragic and deadly school shooting, this time at a Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin. Police say the shooter killed a teacher and another teenager before taking her own life. 6 other people were wounded. They include 2 students who are in critical condition now with life-threatening wounds. Detectives say the suspect is a 15-year-old student, Natalie Rupnow, who went by the name Samantha. Reporter Liz Nagy from our sister station in Chicago is on the scene with the latest developments.
Tonight, Madison police say it was a 15-year-old female student who shot and killed a teacher and fellow student inside this school, and just a 2nd grade student who called police for help. It was the kind of increasingly common day American parents have come to dread, racing to their children's school at the alert of gunshots fired inside.
I was on the road. I deliver for a living, and as I saw the cops driving by, then I got the text from the school, and that really hit me hard as I'm driving down the road seeing ambulances.
By the time Carl Gottschalk picked up his young children hours later, his 2nd grade daughter Nora was still shoeless.
I was in the hallway and I was changing from my shoes to my boots to go to lunch because I have recess after, but then I heard the shooting and screams.
Police say the gunshots had come from the handgun fired by a teenage student of the Abundant Life Christian School.
We went to the church right next to my school, and everyone was panicking still because a lot of police were there, a lot.
Police and firefighters cleared the school of roughly 300 students and teachers in a matter of minutes.
It's hard for me to place into words what they ran into.
Our commanders, including the fire chief and I, was in a commander's training less than 2 weeks ago, going over this exact same scenario for another fictional location. And so all of that came into play today.
Now, as investigators try to figure out what spurred the school shooting, parents are squeezing their children tightly, knowing at least 2 families won't get that chance again.
We always send prayers. We always send thoughts. And then when are we going to stop doing that? This is not okay.
Tonight, police say multiple people are still in the hospital, including 2 students who they say could still die from their injuries. Now they say investigators are working with the alleged shooter's family to try and figure out why this happened.
We're diving into something pretty heavy today. A deeply unsettling event that happened just yesterday at Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin. Just imagine. It's Monday morning, December 16th. Seems like any other day, right? But then gunfire erupts. And what makes this even more disturbing is that the 911 call reporting this shooting came from a 2nd grader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That just hits you in the gut, doesn't it, 2nd grader? I mean, that really highlights the reality for these kids. They're not just aware of the possibility of violence. They're actually prepared to react to it at such a young age. It makes you wonder about the effects, the psychological effects of growing up with active shooter drills is just a normal part of life. How does that shape their understanding of the world, their sense of safety and security?
It's a really chilling thought. This shooting, unfortunately, resulted in the deaths of a teacher and a student, and 6 others were wounded. The shooter, a 15-year-old student named Natalie Rupnow. She also died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So we're going to try to unpack this tragedy. We'll piece together what we know from different sources and go beyond just what happened to see if we can understand why.
Yeah, I think it's crucial to look at the context. This shooting happened just before 11 a.m. It was during a mixed age and mixed grade study hall. And it seems like the violence was limited to one specific area, though it's unclear if it was a classroom or a hallway. But what is important to note is that the police response was really fast. They arrived on the scene very quickly and found the suspect already dead when they got there. And it's worth mentioning that no officers fired their weapons.
Okay, so we've learned that Abundant Life had some security measures in place, but they didn't have things like metal detectors or a school resource officer. Can you explain what a school resource officer is and what role they play?
Sure. A school resource officer is basically a law enforcement officer assigned specifically to a school. And their role is actually pretty multifaceted. They provide security, of course, but they also work on building relationships with the students. And sometimes they even teach classes on safety and law-related topics. The idea is that their presence can deter crime and also ensure a quick response if there is an emergency. But there's a lot of debate about how effective they actually are. Some people argue that they make the school environment safer, while others worry about the potential for criminalizing minor offenses, especially when it comes to students of color.
That's a really important point, and it gets to the heart of this larger question about balancing security measures with creating a positive and nurturing learning environment. So Abundant Life did have security cameras. They practiced lockdown drills, and they had even recently had updated training from the Madison Police Department. In fact, Barbara Weirs, the director of elementary and school relations there, she commented on how well the students and faculty handled the situation, despite being terrified.
It's remarkable, isn't it, that even in the midst of such terror, they were able to follow the protocols. While tragically, this preparedness couldn't prevent the shooting, it might have played a crucial role in minimizing the number of casualties. But it still raises that tough question. How do we prepare children for these kinds of events without constantly instilling fear in them? What are the lasting effects of growing up in a world where this kind of violence is a possibility?
And it's not just the drills, right? We have the second grader who knew to call 911 during a shooting. That really shows how deep this fear is becoming in our society.
Absolutely. Even Police Chief Sean Barnes was really struck by that detail. He said, and I quote, "Let that soak in for a minute." Really powerful words.
It's haunting, to say the least. I think it forces us to question what kind of world we're building for our children. But for a moment, let's shift our attention to the shooter herself. We don't know a lot about Natalie Rupnow. She went by Samantha. She was a 15-year-old student at the school. But her motives are still a mystery. The investigation is ongoing. But so far, details about her life and what might have led to this tragedy are really scarce.
Right. And even though her father is cooperating with the police, it's not clear yet what he knew about the situation beforehand. And it's important to note that authorities are not currently planning to charge the parents.
This shooting also brings up that debate about school security again. And we mentioned earlier that Abundant Life didn't have metal detectors or a resource officer. So what are some of the arguments for and against those specific measures?
Well, the effectiveness of metal detectors is definitely a point of contention. Some people argue they can prevent people from bringing weapons into schools, but others point out that they create a more restrictive and maybe even anxiety-inducing environment. They also worry about the potential for criminalizing what might be considered minor infractions and contributing to a general climate of distrust.
And those measures don't really get to the root of the problem, the underlying issues that might lead someone to violence in the first place. But before we dive deeper into this debate, I think it's important to ground this event in reality for a moment. One eyewitness, John Diaz de Leon, described the scene. Police cars everywhere, students running, and this stark contrast to what is usually a quiet, peaceful neighborhood.
It's a chilling image. And it really brings home the human cost of this tragedy. It's easy to get lost in the policy discussions and the search for solutions, but that description reminds us that real people and real families are forever changed by this.
It's a powerful reminder that behind the statistics and headlines, there are these individual stories of unimaginable pain and loss. And as we try and understand why this happened, we're left with so many unanswered questions. We know so little about Natalie, her motivations, her state of mind leading up to this.
Yeah, and that lack of information can lead to a lot of speculation. But it's so important that we resist that urge. We need to wait for the facts to come out from the investigation before we start making any judgments. And even when those facts do emerge, we have to remember that at the center of all of this is a human being, a young girl who took her own life and the lives of others.
It's a tragedy on so many levels, and it really underscores the need for empathy and compassion, not just for the victims and their families, but also for those who were connected to the shooter.
Absolutely. They are going through immense grief as well and trying to understand how this could have happened. The circle of pain extends far beyond the immediate victims.
This event has also understandably brought a lot of calls for action to try to prevent future tragedies. President Biden issued a statement calling the shooting shocking and unconscionable. And he renewed his call for Congress to pass stricter gun safety laws.
Yeah, this seems to be a familiar pattern. Every time one of these tragedies happens, there are calls for legislative action, debates about gun control, mental health resources, school safety measures. But there's also this sense of weariness, I think, like a feeling of, here we are again, with no real solutions in sight.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed. The issue is so complex.
It really is. There are so many factors that contribute to gun violence. Finding effective solutions means taking a multifaceted approach.
We need to have some honest conversations, and maybe some difficult ones too.
Definitely.
It's about things like mental health, access to resources, the role of social media, even the way violence is portrayed, maybe even glorified in our culture. These are conversations that need to happen everywhere, in homes, in schools, in our communities, at every level of government.
And we can't leave young people out of these conversations.
That's right.
They are living with this reality every single day.
Yeah.
And their voices, their perspectives are critical if we're going to find meaningful solutions.
In the meantime, schools all across the country are trying to do what they can, increasing security and preparing for potential threats. We've already talked about what Abundant Life had in place. But what are some other examples of things schools are doing to try to prevent these tragedies?
Well, a lot of schools are investing in things like security upgrades, controlled access points, surveillance systems, and even using some advanced technologies like AI-powered threat detection software. There's also a bigger emphasis now on training staff and students on how to respond if there is an active shooter situation.
Some schools are even incorporating trauma-informed practices into their curriculum, teaching students ways to manage their emotions and build resilience when they face adversity. Others are focusing on creating more inclusive and supportive environments, addressing things like bullying and social isolation, issues that can contribute to feelings of hopelessness and despair.
These proactive approaches are encouraging, but we need to do more than just react to threats. We need to address the root causes of violence in our society as a whole.
It's a huge challenge. Where do we even begin?
Well, it means tackling some really complex issues, things like poverty and inequality, lack of access to mental health care, and the way violence has become so normalized in our media and entertainment. This requires a long-term systemic effort from all parts of society.
It can feel so overwhelming, almost like you want to become numb to it all.
It's understandable.
Especially with the constant news of shootings. But we can't let that happen. We cannot allow this to become the new normal.
I completely agree. Every life lost to gun violence is a tragedy, and each act of violence leaves scars that impact communities and generations.
So what can we do, as individuals, I mean? How can we face this seemingly impossible challenge? What actions can we take to actually make a difference?
I know it can feel paralyzing when we look at how big this issue is, but it's so important that we don't let that stop us from taking action.
So you're saying we can't give up hope?
Absolutely not. It's easy to get caught in a cycle of despair, but it's in moments like these that we have to really dig deep and find that spark of hope, that determination to make a difference.
As we're wrapping up this deep dive, I keep thinking about that second grader who called 911.
It's hard to forget, isn't it? Such a powerful image.
It really is. And it brings up this profound question. If this is the world we're leaving for our children, what does that say about us? What is our responsibility to keep them safe and create a future where they don't have to live in fear?
That is the question we have to grapple with. I think it starts with a commitment to staying engaged, to not shying away from difficult conversations or uncomfortable truths. We have to acknowledge how complex this issue is and resist the temptation to oversimplify it or look for easy answers.
It's easy to get caught up in the blame game or to just throw our hands up in despair.
I know, but that doesn't lead to solutions. Instead, we need to channel our emotions, our grief, our anger, our frustration, and turn them into constructive action.
So what does that look like?
It could be advocating for policy changes, supporting organizations that are working to prevent gun violence, or even just having open and honest conversations with our loved ones.
So you're saying even small actions can have an impact?
Absolutely. Every step we take, no matter how small it seems, contributes to a larger movement for change. And we have to remember that change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process, and it requires persistence, resilience, and a belief that a better future is possible.
Okay, so we've talked about the role of government, schools, and communities, but what about us as individuals? What concrete actions can we take to be a part of the solution?
It can be tough to know where to start. I always encourage people to start by learning more about the issue, understand the different perspectives, the proposed solutions, the organizations doing the work on the ground. Once you have a good grasp of the landscape, you can figure out what actions feel right for you.
So things like supporting organizations that align with our values, contacting our representatives to advocate for specific policies, or even just talking to our family and friends to raise awareness.
Exactly. And don't underestimate those conversations. Sometimes just sharing your concerns and listening to other perspectives can be a powerful first step towards change.
It's easy to feel helpless when we see such a widespread problem, but you're right. We can't give in to apathy. We have to believe that we can create a world where our children can go to school without fear, where their classrooms are truly safe places for learning and growth.
That's the vision we need to hold on to. And even though we might not have all the answers right now, one thing's for sure, we can't stay silent. We have to keep talking about this, keep pushing for change, and keep demanding better for our children, for ourselves, and for our future.
This has been a really tough conversation.
It has.
But it's also been a reminder that we're not alone in this. There are so many people and organizations out there working so hard to create a safer, more just world.
And we hope you'll join us in that effort, our listeners, I mean. Do your research, learn, discuss, get involved. We can make a difference together.
Thank you for being with us on this deep dive. It's been a heavy topic, but I hope it's left you with a sense of purpose, a renewed commitment to creating a better future, where tragedies like this become unthinkable.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in, policy debates and the search for solutions. But that description, that eyewitness account, it really drives home the human cost of this tragedy. These aren't just statistics. Real people, real families, their lives were changed forever in a single moment.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking reminder that behind all the statistics and the headlines, there are individual stories of just unimaginable pain and loss. And as we're trying to make sense of this, trying to figure out why this happened, we're just left with so many questions. We still know so little about Natalie, what her motivations were, her state of mind leading up to this.
Right, and that lack of information. It's understandable that it fuels speculation, but it's so important that we resist that urge. We need to let the investigation run its course, let the facts come to light before we start jumping to conclusions or making judgments. And even then, even when we have more information, it's crucial to remember that. At the center of the story is a human being, a young girl who made a choice, a horrific choice, that ended her life and the lives of others.
It's a tragedy on so many levels, and I think it underscores the need for empathy and compassion, not just for the victims and their families, of course, but also for those who are connected to the shooter.
Yeah, absolutely. They're experiencing immense grief, too, trying to grapple with how this could have happened, the ripple effects of pain and suffering. They extend far beyond the immediate victims.
This event has understandably reignited calls for action to try to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again. President Biden released a statement calling the shooting shocking and unconscionable, and he urged Congress to pass stricter gun safety laws.
It's a familiar refrain, unfortunately. After every one of these shootings, we hear calls for legislative action, debates about gun control, mental health resources, school safety measures, but there's also this growing sense of weariness, a feeling that we've been here before, and that real solutions are still out of reach.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of it all.
It really is. There are so many different factors that contribute to gun violence, and it's going to take a multifaceted approach to find effective solutions.
We need to have some honest conversations, maybe even some uncomfortable ones.
I agree.
About mental health, access to resources, the role of social media, even the way violence is portrayed and maybe even glorified in our culture. These conversations need to be happening everywhere, in our homes, schools, communities, at every level of government.
And we can't forget about young people.
Right.
They're living with this reality every day, so their voices and their perspectives need to be part of the conversation if we want to find solutions that will actually make a difference.
In the meantime, schools across the country are taking steps to increase security and prepare for potential threats. We talked about what Abundant Life had in place, but what are some other things schools are doing?
A lot of schools are investing in security upgrades. Things like, controlled access points, surveillance systems, even advanced technology like AI-powered threat detection software. And there's also a much greater emphasis now on training staff and students on how to respond to an active shooter situation.
I've heard about some schools incorporating trauma-informed practices into their curriculum, teaching students ways to regulate their emotions and build resilience. And others are focusing on creating more inclusive and supportive school environments, addressing issues like bullying and social isolation, which can contribute to those feelings of hopelessness and despair.
These are encouraging developments, but we can't just focus on reacting to threats. We need to go deeper and address the root causes of violence in our society.
That's such a huge challenge. It can feel overwhelming. Where do we even start?
Well, it means tackling some complex issues like poverty, inequality, lack of access to mental health care, and the way violence has become normalized in our media and entertainment. Is a long-term effort, a systemic effort that's going to require involvement from all parts of society.
It's so easy to feel overwhelmed by it all, to want to just shut down, become numb to the constant news of shootings.
I understand.
But we can't let that happen. We can't let this become the new normal.
You're absolutely right. Every single life lost to gun violence is a tragedy, and every act of violence leaves scars that ripple through communities and across generations.
So what can we do, as individuals, in the face of this challenge that feels almost impossible to overcome? What are some actions we can take that will actually make a difference.
It can feel really paralyzing,
Yeah.
when you look at just the sheer scale of this issue. But we can't let that stop us from taking action. We can't give in to that feeling of helplessness.
I know what you mean. It's like you want to throw your hands up and say, what can I do? But I think that's when it becomes even more crucial to focus on what we can control, what actions we can take.
Exactly, and it's easy to get stuck in that cycle of despair, but in times like these, it's so important to dig deep and find that spark of hope, that determination to make a difference.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't stop thinking about that second grader who called 911.
I know, it's a detail that really sticks with you.
Yeah.
It's so jarring to think about a child that young being so aware of the potential for violence.
It really is, and it raises this question, if this is the world we're leaving for our children, what does that say about us as a society? What's our responsibility to ensure their safety and create a future where they don't have to live in fear?
That's the fundamental question we have to grapple with. And I honestly believe it starts with a commitment to staying engaged, to not shying away from these difficult conversations. Even when they're uncomfortable, we have to acknowledge how complex this issue is and resist the urge to oversimplify or look for easy answers.
It's so tempting, though, isn't it, to just point fingers or, throw up our hands and say it's hopeless.
I know, but that doesn't lead us anywhere productive. Instead, we need to take all of these emotions, our grief, our anger, our frustration, and channel them into constructive action.
Okay, so what does that look like? What are some examples?
Well, it could look like advocating for policy changes, supporting organizations that are working to prevent gun violence, even just having open and honest conversations with our loved ones about this issue.
So even small actions can have an impact.
Absolutely. Every step we take, no matter how small it may seem, contributes to a larger movement for change. And we need to keep reminding ourselves that change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process that requires persistence and resilience, and most importantly, a belief that a better future is possible.
You're right. We have to hold on to that belief. So we've talked about the role of government in schools and communities, but what about us as individuals? What can we each do to be part of the solution?
It can feel overwhelming at first, trying to figure out where to start. I always recommend that people start by educating themselves about the issue. Really dive into the different perspectives, the different proposed solutions, learn about the organizations that are already doing the work on the ground. Once you have a better grasp of the landscape, then you can identify what actions resonate most with you personally.
So things like supporting organizations that align with your values, contacting your elected officials to advocate for specific policies, or even just having conversations with your family and friends to raise awareness.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of those conversations sometimes. Simply sharing your concerns and really listening to other people's perspectives can be a really powerful catalyst for change.
It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such a huge problem, but you're right, we can't give up hope. We can't let apathy win. We have to hold on to that belief that we can create a world where our kids can go to school without fear, where their classrooms are truly safe havens for learning and growing.
That's the vision we need to strive for. And while we may not have all the answers right now, one thing is clear: we cannot afford to stay silent. We have to keep talking about this, keep pushing for change, and keep demanding better for our children, for ourselves, and for our future.
This has been a really heavy deep dive, but it's also been a powerful reminder that we're not alone in this. There are so many people and organizations out there working tirelessly to create a safer, more just world, and we encourage all of you listening to join us in that effort. Research, learn, discuss, get involved together. We can make a difference. Thank you for being with us today.